I'm on the floor this afternoon to talk about the issue not only of the day, the week, the month, the year, it's the issue of what to do about the debt ceiling. Everyone around here knows what will happen if we fail to raise the debt ceiling by August 2nd deadline. The United States will default on its loan payments. Defaulting could have catastrophic consequences on our economy as we attempt to recover from the worst economic recession since the Great Depression. Failing to raise the debt limit could send our economy into a tailspin with unthinkable results for the American people. With the stakes so high, we must ask ourselves, how did we get into this position? Or as my constituents back home in Alaska would say, how'd you get into this mess? Over the last decade, both sides of the aisle have played a role in this irresponsible spending that resulted in our current fiscal crisis. At the beginning of the last decade, we had a budget surplus. Let me say that again, a budget surplus of $200 billion, with a projected surplus of $5 trillion for the next 10 years. By the time I took office in 2009, not only had our budget surplus disappeared, we faced a budget deficit of over $1 trillion. Now, the creditworthiness of the United States is in jeopardy. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle oppose raising the debt ceiling, citing the need to rein in reckless spending. While I support broad deficit reduction measures, I strongly disagree with those who neglect to recognize the consequences of failing to raise the debt limit and defaulting on our financial obligations. Mr. President, everyone around here knows what will happen if we do not. For the first time ever, the creditworthiness of the United States would be put in jeopardy. I want to step back for a second here and remind everyone that Congress had enacted 74 measures on the federal debt limit, 74 times. So they obviously understand what will happen if the American government defaults on their payments. The ceiling has been increased by both Democrat and Republican administrations and Congress. George W. Bush, first term in May 2003, we increased the limit by $984 billion. In fact, Congress raised the debt ceiling 7 times during his administration. Senate Republicans provided the votes to raise the debt ceiling in 2002, 2003, 2004, and 2006. The importance of keeping a good credit rating and paying the bills is something the American people understand and are doing their very best during these hard times. I hear about this all the time when I'm back home. While the American people understand that defaulting on our loans would only make matters worse, some members of Congress insist on playing politics with the issue even during this economically uncertain times. If the United States government defaults on its financial obligations, it would be the first time in the history of our credit would be downgraded. Let me repeat, never before in the history have we let our creditworthiness be called into question. The consequences are large and somewhat unknown. But let me take a little bit from what the senator from New York talked about and expand on that. And that is, how does it affect, as I was just asked recently, how does it affect the individual, the person working hard every day, paying their mortgage, driving to work, pumping gas in their car, going on a vacation, just doing the everyday things that Americans do in my state, what Alaskans do, especially now. They're summertime, they're out fishing, they're enjoying the summer, kids are out of school, and State Fair is getting geared up in another month. What happens? Well, first off, if our creditworthiness and we default on our loans that are due, our obligations, some immediate things will probably happen. First off, individuals who have credit cards, their rates will go up. Because if you read the fine print of those great credit card bills we get, which are very small and very detailed, they talk about how the rate is structured. And the rate is structured around what happens on the market. And obviously, a lot of the people today maybe they have a good rate, maybe 9, 10% on their credit card, but average is probably between 15 and 18%. That interest rate will go up. Home mortgage rates, if you're on an adjustable rate mortgage, it's going to be adjusted up. If you're a small business person, as I have been and am still today, and my wife, there are many Businesses that borrow on a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year loan, adjustable rate maybe monthly, maybe it's an inventory loan because they have a seasonal business, all those rates will go up, assuming they can get a loan. When you think about when you drive your car and you go pump that gas and fill up your tank, and we think prices are high now, oil commodities are traded in US dollars. So the net effect is going to be that dollar is going to have less of a value, which means the price of the fuel will go up and what you pump into your car will increase. 75% of the world markets and transactions across this world are done in US dollars. So if you impact the creditworthiness of the country, the dollar has left faith and credit behind it, which of course costs money, which means things we import, such as fuel, to fuel our cars, our businesses, energy to heat this building, to turn on these lights, go up. So it has real impact to individuals. It's not some global discussion here in the halls of Congress. It's not about just, debt limit and GDP and all these other phrases that people kind of wonder what it means to them in their individual life, but it has a direct impact into their lives, as these examples. What happens to their retirement funds? That a portion of their funds are invested in maybe U.S. government securities. Well, they're going to see a change, dramatic change. The American people, Alaskans, are already struggling. To add this additional burden because we're unable to sit down and work together and solve this problem in a cohesive, comprehensive way is irresponsible. To my friends across the aisle, let me remind you of what President Reagan said in 1983 to a letter to then Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker. He said it better than I think any of us could say. And this is directly from his letter, quote, "The full consequences of a default, or even the serious prospect of a default, by the United States are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. Degradation of the full faith and credit of the United States would have substantial effects on the domestic financial markets and on the value of the dollar in the exchange markets. The nation can ill afford to allow such a result. The risk, the costs, the disruptions are incalculable. Damage lead me to but one conclusion. The Senate must pass the legislation before Congress adjourns," close quote. It's amazing how you can take a quote like this from history and just transplant it today. And it's the same situation. At the same time as we deal with this, I strongly believe we must pass a deficit reduction measure. I have supported the Deficit Commission, the Debt Commission, and their efforts. I didn't agree with it all, but I agreed that the $4 trillion mark should be hit, and we should try to do our best. Because in order to solve this problem, this challenge, and we all have our sides where we're kind of hunkered down. But I think every time I go back home, and I was back home this last weekend for my short 48 hours. I spend more time, I think, in the plane getting home than staying at home at times. But when I got home, people say very simply to me, it's a combination. We're going to have to reduce the spending. I don't object to that. We're going to have to create a more fair tax system, which I don't object to. Matter of fact, along with Senator Wyden and Senator Coates, I've introduced a tax reform legislation that does just that. Lowers the corporate rate, simplifies the individual rates, focuses on a growth agenda with our tax policy, and gets rid of a lot of these loopholes and shelters and tax havens, all these things that people have taken advantage of and paid no taxes, but yet enjoy the great bounties of our country. And we also have to invest. We have to invest in a growth agenda. That means investing in infrastructure, in education, because as you reduce your budget, which I don't disagree with, and as we create a more fair and balanced tax system, we have to do one of the most principal things, and that's continue to help grow this economy. And we have to invest in our infrastructure, invest in a variety of things that grow our economy. Mr. President, this is an opportunity for us to put our country on sound financial footing by passing a broad deficit reduction measure that includes cost savings and increased revenues. When it comes to protecting America's economic security and improving fiscal responsibility, the time is to act now. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I thank you for the opportunity.